Welcome to another episode of the Snap Fantasy Football Podcast, your weekly dose of news and advice that comes to your pocket every single Saturday. Holding it down, here we got Mac, Mark, Scott, and Landon. Enjoy today's show.
What's up, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Snap Fantasy Football Podcast. Today we continue the famous series of Draft or Pass Third Round Edition. We have a ton of talent left on the board. Names like Amari Cooper, Le'Veon Bell, Cooper Kupp, Melvin Gordon, you name it, they're all still here. So get ready to do a little value diving and determining whether to pass or draft. Before we get started, make sure if you like this video, please do consider liking or subscribing. Drop a comment in the section below. We really like engaging with the community. It's why we do it. It's for a lot of fun. So consider checking us out as well on socials. We can be found at snap_fantasy on Instagram and Twitter. So check us out there. But let's get into it. First up, Mark, it's the third round. Who are you targeting?
Yeah, so first, I just want to say, this draft or pass business here, it's really fun. I've been loving going, putting our gut feeling against these ADPs here. And we're looking at a round that's actually full of great names. And there's some players on here that I think are getting overpaid for. There's others that are only on this third round list because their stock is lower than ever. But I'm going to talk about a guy who has been disrespected. He's late in this third round. ADP wise, and just the fact that he is on the team he's on definitely makes his stock go down, and that is Allen Robinson II. Allen Robinson is a player that this podcast loves, and I would be remiss if I didn't drop Mac's name in this because he is probably the biggest Robinson supporter that I've ever met. But I digress. I love Allen Robinson because he is simply a prototype player. He is the number one on this team with absolutely no competition. When you look at the fact that he's got the 309 ADP, there's a good reason that you don't see another Bears receiver for about 8 rounds. And Anthony Miller is the player opposite him. So right away, you take Allen Robinson, who I believe is 26 or 27 years old. He has got a string of 150 target seasons. Hasn't quite had a 100 reception season yet, but he was the closest he's come so far last year with 98. So the fact that he put up 98 catches on 154 targets already tells you a lot. They force the ball to him, especially when Trubisky is under center. Now, we know that there is a new face at quarterback in town with Nick Foles, but I think whoever ends up getting that snap is going to be going for Allen Robinson. He's the most talented player on that offense. But I'll also mention that they have David Montgomery going into his second year, and now that he's a bit more acclimated to the NFL, there's a chance that Monty could really take some of that action away. But I just think as far as quarterback dependence on him, I don't think there's any way you could lose taking Allen Robinson here. And to break down some of his statistics, this guy is super impressive. He holds down an 84% success rate on double coverage. He is amazing at making contested catches. He accounted for 35% of the Chicago Bears touchdowns in 2019. Come on, is there anything I'm saying here that make you not want to draft him? This guy's a steal. For where he's going at the 309 here, got to be Allen Robinson all day.
Marky, you make some excellent points, and it's hard to argue with the prototypical number one wide receiver that Allen Robinson is, but it is the Chicago Bears. They're a terrible team. Like, Trubisky is not a good quarterback, and Nick Foles, who knows if he's going to be good anymore? Like, they don't have a lot of touchdown upside because that team is just in shambles. That doesn't concern you? You'd rather just have the number one on a bad offense?
Well, if you look back a few more years, Lando, when Allen Robinson was a Jacksonville Jaguar, that's not exactly a team that people write home about. I think no matter, it's just a testament that wherever Allen Robinson goes and whoever's throwing him the ball, it can be the 32nd quarterback in the league, and he would still make it work because he is that contested catch monster, and he's an end zone threat on almost any time that they get on that half of the field. So to answer your question, Lando, I don't care who's throwing him the ball. It could be you or Scott. That guy's going to get his work and he's going to eat.
Wow, making a bold claim when we're talking about that Bears offense. I will say one thing for you, Mark. If you're going to bet on a wide receiver getting a lot of volume, pick a team that's probably going to be losing. And if you're betting on the Bears offense this season, I'm going to say that's probably the case. Landon, you had some pretty good counterpoints there. Who are you targeting in the third round?
I think we would be remiss to leave out a guy that's been skyrocketing up draft boards. His counterpart is only a round ahead of time, and he's been one of the all-time greats at wide receiver as long as a lot of us probably ever playing fantasy football. And that's going to be Calvin Ridley. He is hotly debated. Every time you look, he's higher up the draft board. He's getting compared to Kenny Golladay, that kind of archetype last year where the targets are there. The offense is there. The consolidated targets is there. There's over 100 targets that Austin Hooper is leaving in that offense, and Hayden Hurst is not going to soak up those targets. He's an Alabama product. He's a possession receiver. He has also good contested catch rate, spoiler alert. He's better against 77% against man, 77% against press. He should be projected for easily over 100 targets. Matt Ryan seems to rebound every other year, so he's bound to have a really good year. Their defense is so bad in Atlanta. They're going to be in a ton of shootouts, and he should be in a recipient of those targets and touchdowns. He broke out fairly good as a rookie in the NFL, and he had a really good year with 866 yards and 7 touchdowns. I think he's an extremely safe receiver, but what do you guys think? I think I have to bring him up because people want to know what we think about Calvin Ridley.
Yeah, Landon, I feel like I've got to cut in on this one because, this offseason in our Dynasty League, I went out, worked my magic, and got a bunch of shares of Mr. Julio Jones. And I think when you're talking about Calvin Ridley at the 311, there's still a lot of great value left on the board. And as long as Julio Jones is healthy and the man in Atlanta, I just don't know if I'm willing to go that high to get a guy like Calvin Ridley. Guys like even T.Y. Hilton. There's a bunch of other wide receivers that I just think have a better shot of being the man in 2020.
Yeah, I actually wanted to mention a little gripe I have with Calvin Ridley's ADP too. And I think so many people are comparing him to Chris Godwin. And I just think that is like you're really grasping there. I don't think there's any water to that statement. Chris Godwin is super duper good after he gets the ball in his hands, where Calvin Ridley just frankly isn't. He runs really nice routes and he has good hands, but Chris Godwin is a machine once he gets the ball. And that is a comparison that I think is being kind of said a lot, and I don't really think it's true.
Yeah, Mark and Scott, you guys both make great points, and I tend to agree with you. I need to bring him up because he's a very hotly talked about player in the NFL, but his ADP has gone too far. He only caught in the 69% of contested catches, and he only caught actually 62% of his targets. He does not break tackles. He doesn't get yards after catch like Mark said. He's 189 pounds. He's not that prototypical number one that we want like Allen Robinson. There's guys going around him, although he's safe. I want Calvin Ridley as my number 2, number 3 wide receiver, not my number 1. I would rather a guy like Odell Beckham, Amari Cooper, even though Amari Cooper is extremely volatile. At least he gives you those big boom games. We still know he's the number 1 in this offense, and we do know Calvin Ridley is not. So I kind of cheated. He's kind of a pass for me at that average draft position. I don't hate the player. I hate the ADP. Another guy I'm going to avoid before we move on is going to be David Johnson. he got traded out of Arizona to an offense that has a really bad O-line, and David Johnson is really bad now at avoiding tackles. He seems to go down on first contact. He had a little bit of an ankle sprain last year, and I guess that just really limited his mobility. If he keeps falling, I get it, especially if you go wide receiver early, that he will be a value. I just don't see David Johnson, although he used to be a really high first round running back. I'm going to pass on David Johnson in the third round. Now, Scott, I want to hear about your draft as a wide receiver.
Well, first of all, I'll acknowledge that as someone who played the Duke Johnson roulette last season in Texas, and it sewered my entire team, I will agree with you on passing on David Johnson. But moving on, I like that you mentioned Amari Cooper and the his boom or bust type of fantasy production, because the wide receiver that I'm targeting in the third round is actually going one spot after him. That's right, currently at the 302, but from what we see range-wise, potentially all the way down to almost the fourth round. The undisputed number one wide receiver in Minnesota, I'm talking about bounce-back candidate Adam Thielen. Now, this might not be the sexiest of picks, and depending on when you're watching this video, depending on the Dalvin Cook situation, there's a reason why he seems to be racing up draft boards. But I don't care if Dalvin Cook ends up holding out. We all know it's going to be a run-first offense by design. But last season, with the same running backs, Kirk Cousins was still a passing machine attempt-wise. We're talking 444 attempts and 70% completion rating, 26 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. Now, Stephon Diggs is gone. It's game over for him in Minnesota. With the Minnesota Miracle gone, J-Jets, their number one draft pick, is getting hyped up to no end, particularly by this guy. But I am hyping him up for Dynasty League purposes only. He is a rookie, an extremely talented rookie. But coming into this offense in 2020, Adam Thielen is the man. When it's red zone time, Adam Thielen will be the man. Stephon Diggs was the type of character and talent that you had to always take a second look at when the chips were down. I think J-Jets will be that time, but will be that type of player eventually, but it's going to take, I believe, at least a season or two to get that type of trust with Kirk Cousins. And I really think that whether it's Madison or Cook lining up in the backfield, I think Thielen is in for a high touchdown 2020, and I really think he's going to bounce back to elite WR1 relevancy in his 29-year-old season. And I think people will be sleeping on him because, his 2019 was nothing to write home about.
All right, Scotty, I got a couple things here. First of all, Kirk Cousins is not a volume passer. He finished in some of the worst in attempts passing. So it is still a somewhat low volume passing offense. But besides that, and I do agree that Adam Thielen is the number one wide receiver in that offense. I am also concerned about the broken tackles for Adam Thielen. 80% of the time, he couldn't break any tackles. So he went down on first contact a lot, and that concerns me with, again, getting that yards after catch. Marky, do you have anything to say about Adam Thielen? Do you like him? What do you think?
I like him. I think it's a spot where you're right. He's coming off a slow season, and frankly, I don't think you're ever going to get Adam Thielen this cheap. But I don't know. I think still just knowing who's out there behind him, like at the start of even the fourth round, I would have a hard time taking someone like Thielen here, even though he's about as cheap as you're ever going to get him.
I like that you brought that up, because when I started thinking, okay, I'm in the draft room, third round, who would I be taking? If I was wide receiver needy, which I feel like I'd be at this point with my type of draft strategy, the options, as I said, Amari Cooper, 301. Thielen at 302, Cooper Kupp 305, Robinson, which you mentioned at 309, and Ridley 311. Then we're into the fourth round. I don't see a single other wide receiver here that in my mind even comes close to being absolute WR1 on what I think will be a powerful offense this upcoming season. Cooper might come close, but there's a lot of question marks there too. So I'm feeling really strong about a bounce back season for Adam Thielen in 2020, and I absolutely would feel okay with him as my WR1.
One thing I really like about Adam Thielen is his number of targets dropped. That is 0%. His hands are amazing. I remember seeing an interview with Thielen, and he said his best attribute are his hands. It's what he trusts the most, and that's what you can rely on Adam Thielen. Is there any passes that you guys that stand out to you that in the third round you are staying away from? They're just off your draft board in the third round?
I can't get behind Zach Ertz personally. I think this is still too high for me to be drafting a tight end. And with some new mouse at wide receiver in town, as well as Dallas Goedert coming up, I don't care if the guy got 130 targets last year. I still will not go Ertz or any tight end for that matter in the third round.
Yeah, for me, you know what? It's hard to say. It's tough to say this because we're in the third round. We're talking about starting running backs that are available, but I still think I'm going to avoid Kenyon Drake. And I know he's a sexy pick this offseason, but I think the air raid's going to stay the air raid, and I'm just still not sold on Kenyon Drake, even in the third round, with the amount of talented running backs that are still on the board. So I'm going to say I'm avoiding Drake. All right, well, that was a look at the third round of Draft or Pass. If you guys are still sticking around, please consider liking and subscribing. Just hit the bell and you will make sure that you're notified of all our content. We're putting out at least one video a week as we prepare for the upcoming 2020 drafts. Football is just around the corner. Make sure to check us out on Instagram and Twitter at snap_fantasy. And keep an eye out for our next video. It will be the fourth round of Draft or Pass. Take it easy, guys.